Hey everyone, today we're going to be responding to some reasonable questions. Isn't that right, Steve? For anyone who doesn't know, a bunch of feminists or people considering themselves to be SJWs uploaded a video asking people from my camp, the anti-SJW camp, a plethora of questions. Most of these questions are serious, but some of them are rhetorical or even disingenuous. But regardless of how the question is asked, I do try my best to answer it as honestly and as completely as I possibly can, well, for the majority of them at least. I realize I'm a little late to the party on this one, but I also did try to give as unique of an answer as I possibly could, so there's still a good amount of new information for everyone, regardless of your position on these sorts of ideas. Anyways, let's jump right into this one.
Are you able to understand the irony of responding to the perceived political correctness of the left with exasperated reactionary hypersensitivity of your own?
I wouldn't usually respond to a question like this, but in trying to sound intelligent, he actually turned this question into a non sequitur. You see, political correctness is everything he just described. It's hypersensitive in that it tries to be sensitive on behalf of other people based on words or phrases rather than their intended meaning. It's reactionary because it's illiberal in nature and violates basic liberal ideas like freedom of expression and freedom of speech. And the only irony here is that this question hilariously points out the complete opposite of what he intended.
What is it with you people and skulls?
How do you define right wing?
The right wing is the political section that encompasses ideas which are both conservative and illiberal, or otherwise reactionary.
Anti-SJWs often have an aversion to being labelled as right wing, yet they regularly defend the right and bash the left. Therefore, why is being labelled right wing a bad thing to you?
Well, I can't speak for everyone, but I think that the vast majority of anti-SJWs are actually left-wing. Take me for example. I'm right here, just as far south and a little further left than Bernie Sanders. As far as the United States goes, I'm considered to be far left, and as for Canada and most places in Europe, I'm a bit further left than a centrist. It is unfathomable for someone to try to label me as right-wing. Now, to try to suggest that we defend the right isn't a fair statement. What we defend are the core ideals of liberalism. You see, social justice generally uses some of the ideas of liberalism as a base, like personal liberty or political and social equality, for example. However, in practice, it violates those very same principles for the greater good. If conservatives are at any point in time trying to defend liberalism, while the people who are supposed to be on the left wing are attacking it, then we must defend liberalism along with them. You cannot make a fair and equal society without maintaining liberalism every step of the way.
And if it's because right wing is used as a pejorative, can you not see how labelling people as SJWs or regressives is also pejorative?
It's not that right wing is a pejorative, it's that right wing is inaccurate. Right wingers don't care if you call them right wing because they are right wing. To them, you're just stating the obvious. But for those of us on the left, someone calling us right wing is either blatantly lying or just completely ignorant of their own political affiliation. Take someone like Sarkeesian, for example. He very normally points out how social justice and feminist ideas are illiberal.
Almost everything about liberalism comes from the concept of self-ownership, or individualism, and includes but is not limited to personal liberty, equality of opportunity, rule of law, economic freedom, which includes access to free markets and laissez-faire trading, freedom of expression, which encompasses freedom of assembly, freedom of the press, freedom of speech, and freedom of thought, and political freedom in a democratic society. If you do not uphold these principles, you are not a liberal.
And then when they have no defense for being called out on their lack of liberalism, the only thing they can do is try to discredit him by calling him a right-winger. SJW and regressive, on the other hand, those aren't lies or mischaracterizations. They accurately point out what's going on with the ideas that someone is espousing, but I'll get into that later on in the video.
Rather than telling people you disagree with to drink bleach, wouldn't it be more productive for you to have an actual conversation about the issues you feel matter?
Tim. Can I call you Tom? Tim? You see this bleach? This is my bleach. The rules here were bring your own bleach. You gotta listen to me now. There's some good bleach. It really helps when things like this happen.
All cisgender people are transphobic, just as all men hold misogynistic views, and all white people are racist.
That's good bleach.
Or is it just easier to do the bleach thing?
Now, Tom, you're exemplifying something I like to call in-group homogeneity bias, and that's not an insult. I've conversed with you once before on Twitter, and when I did, you actually took the time to hear what I was saying out. You were very approachable. The in-group homogeneity bias comes into play when you expect that other people within your group meet the same standards that you hold yourself to. There isn't anything wrong with having that expectation, however, it doesn't necessarily conform to reality. I'm just going to leave this image here to exemplify why this is. And to answer your question, yeah, it is typically easier to do the bleach thing, and this is why.
You claim to be proponents of rational, logical, evidence-based argumentation. That's great, that's entirely laudable. But when I look at your online activity, when I look at, I don't know, for example, your Twitter feed, that's often not what I see. How do you reconcile this claim to be evidence-based and rational and logical against stuff like, oh, I was just trolling you, oh, I was just shitposting, or TLDR?
While responding to an argument with TLDR is arrogant and dismissive, there's absolutely no reason why someone can't be a shitposter and also have reason and rational arguments. Now, I can't really say anything more about this because none of these are things that I personally do, but the question still has to be asked, why can't you do both?
No, seriously? What is it with you people and skulls?
Are you aware that the ridiculous buzzwords you helped to popularize, like SJW and cuck and regressive, have all lost whatever meaning they once had and only serve now as casual insults and pejoratives to derail any meaningful conversation?
No, they haven't, and no, they aren't. These words are very, very commonly misused, much like Marxism and communism. However, they still do have their original meaning. Their original meanings are very valid and very relevant, and for your convenience, I've included definitions for each of them. If you're watching this and you're someone who abuses these words, I encourage you to take notes, because you're part of the problem as well.
For the last time, what is it with you people and committing actual literal felonies?
For the last time, what is it with you people in supporting actual literal pedophiles? Oh hey, light bulb moment. How about neither of us try to hold each other responsible for the actions of individuals? I notice you guys seem to do that a lot.
Like, you might want to work on that?
In videos and in the comment sections, anti-feminists often take up the most extreme or the weakest feminist position they can find, or they just straight up misrepresent what the feminist position is. Instead, why not take up the strongest, most robust feminist argument you can find and really challenge yourself?
This is a question that only works if feminism is a monolith, which it most certainly is not. If there are feminist positions that you would rather we go after, then suggest them to us. Even then, any particular sect of feminism is as valid for criticism as any other sect of feminism, just from the simple fact that it, again, is not a monolith.
I am deeply concerned with male addiction rates, suicide rates, and abuse rates, because I have worked with these issues in the quote-unquote real world. Would you be willing as anti-feminists to put aside your differences with feminists for the greater good of addressing these issues?
Look, I'm gonna stop you right here. We disagree with each other. We're not mortal enemies. If there's an initiative you want our help with, just go ahead and ask. The door's always open.
What is third wave feminism? Because I've often heard you folks insist that you have no objection to feminism in general. It's specifically third wave feminism that you have a quarrel with. So what is third wave feminism specifically?
It's feminism in the current day, which focuses primarily on perceived social issues rather than any sort of legal issues, because for the most part, the legal issues have been worked out.
And what specifically about third wave feminism do you have such a problem with?
Well, aside from the fact that it tends to draw conclusions from faulty information, it's highly authoritarian and tries to police people's social lives. Ever heard of Atheism Plus? Is that ringing any bells?
Why is it that this feminist represents all feminists, but this men's rights activist doesn't represent all men's rights activists?
Whoa, wait, sexism all of a sudden? Ladies and men are different? So we're supposed to punch men and not hit ladies and open doors for men, but not ladies? Fuck you, get out of my face, you tiny piece of shit.
Okay, that guy is not an MRA. At least as far as we know, he's not an MRA. He's just some dude who was pissed off because when he went up and asked for McNuggets, they apparently didn't have any. But when the woman behind him in line went up to ask for chicken nuggets, they suddenly had chicken nuggets. Probably should have checked into the full context of that, just gonna say. Anyways, Trigglypuff does not represent all feminists. She represents everything that's currently wrong with feminism and social justice.
Why am I continually asked to answer for the views of feminists if I agree with feminism's overall aims, but don't agree much with those particular feminists? Does that mean that I can ask you to answer for anybody who labels themselves similarly to you, even if you don't agree much?
Yes, you can, because you do not know what I do and do not agree with. And more importantly, as a layman, asking a feminist why a certain feminist thinks a certain thing or does a certain thing makes a lot more sense than asking some random person. I mean, think about it. As a layman, I don't know shit about pancreatic cancer. When I'm talking to my doctor, I might ask my doctor about pancreatic cancer. Now, he would probably refer me to an oncologist for more questions, but, he would have more knowledge on the subject than I would in general. I'm not sure if this actually answers your question because it seems like it's missing a lot of context, but yeah, whatever.
If SJWs are bad because they spend too much time whining and don't talk about real problems, then why aren't you talking about those problems instead of just whining about the other people over and over and over for literally years?
Because them whining about not real problems starts to create actual problems. Look, don't ask me how this happened, but 2 people in New York were arrested for manspreading, and the judge had to dismiss the case. Okay? Do you not understand that these things have consequences? Somehow their consequences get blown way out of proportion, but they have consequences. It has gotten to a point where we actually have to point out that these things are inconsequential, and why they're inconsequential, because apparently people are too stupid to know better. Maybe they just got told to listen and believe too many times. I don't know.
Why don't you seem as concerned with actual feminist theory in academia as you are with wrecking people for views?
Oh, Tom, you have asked me a doozy of a question, and I don't even think you've realized it. I am deeply concerned with feminist theory in academia. You see, as an anti-feminist, and I do absolutely identify with the title anti-feminist, my goal is to expose how the radical elements of second-wave feminism have both birthed and shaped third-wave feminism in its image. You see, it is my goal to deconstruct and destroy feminism in its current state, and hopefully remove all need for it in the future in the process. Now, at the moment, my means of doing so are quite limited. However, if making a mockery of people who espouse the ideas critical to feminist theory is all I can do, then so be it.
Since so many of you profess to be admirers of second-wave feminism as opposed to third-wave feminism, I thought it would be interesting to ask which second-wave feminists in particular do you appreciate? Which books written by second-wave feminists have you read and found interesting? Which second-wave feminist activists have you specifically admired as you formed the opinion that you like second-wave feminism but you have no use for third-wave feminism? I'm just curious.
Steve, let me start off by saying that I in no way admire second-wave feminism. Now, I don't like it, but it's very difficult to condemn because a lot of good things came out of second-wave feminism. However, as I look to feminist academia and see books such as Mother Right and Growing Up Underground from radical feminist author and domestic terrorist Jane Alpert, responsible for bombing the New York Federal Building, the New York Police Headquarters, the U.S. State Department Building, and the U.S. Capitol, as well as To Sing a Battle Cry, which features the writings of Bernardine Dohrn, the radical feminist leader of the Proud Eagle tribe who made the FBI's most wanted list in 1970 after carrying out a bombing at Harvard University and then another bombing in 1974 at the San Francisco Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. When I see these interesting books not only being praised but also being used as a basis to form third-wave feminist theory, this is what informs my opinion that I have no use for third-wave feminism, and also that third-wave feminism has no use in this world. Oh, and fun fact, up until about 3 years ago, Bernardine Dohrn was the clinical associate professor of law in the Children and Family Justice Center at Northwestern University School of Law. Why are radfem terrorists teaching law in my country?
You do understand that reading the title of a book or an article or watching the first 15 seconds of a video is not going to give you a deep, nuanced understanding of what that book or article or video is about, right? That being said, how can you expect to understand or critique feminist sources if you don't even attempt to understand what they're trying to say?
Michael, you make it very difficult to not give you a snarky, sarcastic response here, but in an effort to take this question at face value, I'll just go ahead and answer this straight out. Number one, yes, I do understand that. Number two, I do in fact try to understand what feminists are trying to say. In fact, I would argue that I try to understand what feminists are trying to say, more so than most feminists understand what other people are trying to say.
Why is trying and failing to debunk a study into sexual assault the #1 priority for a rational thinker now?
As far as I know, I haven't failed at this, but you're more than welcome to try to prove me wrong if you want to. The annotation is right there.
One of the major arguments that I see in many of your videos is that it is possible to separate criticism of the religion of Islam from the actual Muslim people. And yet, this line seems to be crossed very often. I see things like raghead or camel fucker or other things like that in your comment sections. I see people taking very serious shots at Muslims in videos and hangouts, and they don't get called out. At least not that I can see. So my question is this: why should a person of conscience who is concerned about the Muslim people and their community not being harmed or mistreated, why should they believe that you're actually only attempting to look at the ideas and talk about the ideas if you ignore bigotry that's occurring right in front of you?
As someone who very frequently watches YouTube videos, I can tell you from a perspective of just personal experience that if somebody is using racial slurs just flagrantly in your comment section or like in a chat or something, they're usually just being an edgelord or troll. And if you start saying anything about them doing it, they're gonna do it even harder and more people are gonna join in because they know it gets them attention. I mean, this is just like internet 101. Don't feed the trolls. Calling them out would make the situation 10 times worse. Now, as far as videos and hangouts go, I've never seen that. I've never seen anyone be just flagrantly, I don't want to say Islamophobic, but I mean, that's the only thing I can really think of to describe what you just talked about. And I've never seen that before. I just haven't. I mean, I'm not saying it doesn't exist, because I mean, just because I haven't seen it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but I literally have never seen that before in someone's hangout or video. I don't know, that might just be a reflection of the YouTubers I watch, as opposed to anti-SJWs as a whole.
And in that light, would you be willing to break bread and salt with moderate Muslim people on your videos, have hangouts, invite them to your channels, just in order to build some bridges there and to learn more about what they think and how they feel and what their experience has been, so that information and knowledge can be furthered?
Now, this isn't terribly relevant to me because Islam isn't much of a focus on my channel at the moment. But, I mean, of course, if it were ever necessary for me to talk about Islam in a way where it would help to have someone who's actually familiar with it on an intimate level, then I would be more than happy to invite them on my channel to talk about their experiences and knowledge of Islam. Now, when you look at other YouTubers in our sort of sphere of YouTube, it's actually not uncommon for them to bring on current Muslims, moderate Muslims, former Muslims, to just expand upon the conversation with their knowledge of Islam.
Do you deny that systemic racism against black people is like a thing in general?
Yes, I do deny that. And the reason why I deny it is because life, as with the universe and everything in it, happens on a causative model. Behind every action, there is a complex sequence of events that have caused it to happen in the exact way that it did. The thing about racism, sexism, religious bigotry, whatever, is that it doesn't leave a very clear path of causes and events behind it. This is because for the person who took the racist action, the events that influenced them to make that racist decision happened within their own personal lives sometime in the past, and usually they aren't at all related to the event where they made their racist action. Now, what people like you will do is you will take the outcome of an irreducibly complex chain of events, you will strip it of all context it had previously and say, look, nothing else explains this action, therefore it must be due to racism. And then when people come along and say, look, there are other factors here that explain this in a way that indicates that it probably has nothing to do with racism, you will try to treat them like idiots and silence them.
If so, what? Okay, just step up, just cover your ears for a second and let the smart people talk.
Thank you for proving my point.
If not, why is it so much more important to you to demonize groups like Black Lives Matter than to actually use your platforms to discuss actual solutions to issues surrounding race and racism?
When people like you make the insane and outlandish claims that you do about the non-existent racism in the United States, it creates radicals. It creates people who, out of fear, feel that their only option is to attack or be attacked. People like you have created this entire movement that thinks that police are targeting them for some sort of mass genocide. And it's not all the cops, it's just the white cops. It's the white cops that want them dead. You tell me if that's not a race issue. You tell me if that's not something that Black Lives Matter fears. And you tell me if any of this existed before people like you started window dressing the issue of poor police training as systemic racism.
If you've ever discussed or done a video about black-on-black crime, When are you going to do a video about white-on-white crime and what we, as white people, can do to solve the problems in our community?
Christy, you know this question has a flawed premise. Usually when people bring up black-on-black crime, it's in response to Black Lives Matter treating police violence against black people as though it's comparable to or worse than black-on-black crime. And this just simply isn't the case. Now, there's a second issue here, and it's that you're begging the question of whether or not there even is a crime problem in the quote-unquote white community. So I'm going to take this question at face value, and we're going to look at the murder rates from 2014 based on race. From the FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting for 2014, using the expanded homicide table 6, along with demographics from the 2014 US Census, we can see that the murder rate for white victims killed by white attackers is 0.79 per 100,000, once you adjust for Hispanic people, that is. We can also see that the murder rate for Hispanic victims killed by other Hispanic people is about 0.94 per 100,000. However, completely dwarfing both of these numbers is the black-on-black murder rate, which comes in at an astounding 5.18 per 100,000. The national average for murder is 1.79 per 100,000. This means that the white-on-white murder rate is less than half the national average. The Hispanic murder rate is just a hair over half the national average, and the black-on-black murder rate is nearly 3 times the national average. See, Christy, this is what happens when you beg the question. You force me to have to get the actual data, and the actual data isn't pretty.
Why is a literal teenager's different definition of racism from you so horrifying that you all have to go, No! No, we have to stop him! We've got to debunk him now! Ah!
Okay, listen, Milo's definition of racism is so horrifying because it's harmful to the concept of actual racism. Under Milo's definition, racism isn't something you do, it's something that you inherently are. Do you not understand how that concept can be so damaging to a country made up of a complex and diverse group of individuals? And on top of that, Milo's audience is a bunch of teenagers just like himself that more or less think that Milo knows what he's talking about. Can you not see why this would give us some valid reasons for concern?
Wherever did you get the idea that racism was a self-applied identity? And if the only true racists are the racists who self-identify as racists, how can we ever expect to make any social progress to reduce racism? Or did I just answer my own question?
I'm pretty sure I know what Steve is talking about here. He's referencing a statement that Sargon made in one of his videos, which was basically to the effect of, real racists won't hesitate to tell you that they're racist. Which is a generally true statement. They see racism as being accurate and correct, so they're not really going to hesitate to tell you what they believe to be the truth. Now, there are some exceptions to this, such as when social situations make it necessary for them not to be perceived as racist, or maybe they're in a position of power where being seen as racist could lead to them losing their job or something like that. But generally this holds up true. I mean, look at the white nationalists and people like that who don't even mind saying overtly racist things because they believe that their position is 100% supported by biology and factually accurate. So Steve, if we're going to treat this as a generally true statement, then the response to your second question is that we just need to educate them on why their racist ideologies aren't accurate. It's really just as simple as that.
You often say that you are for equality of opportunity, but if people of color, for instance, have to overcome barriers whites do not, such as discrimination and unequal treatment as are well documented in various studies, then how can the current situation be thought of as equal opportunity in any real way? And why do you consider it racist to discuss these issues?
I touched on this before in my response to the one janitor. It's not racist to want to discuss these issues. It's racist to take an irreducibly complex series of causes and events and try to boil that down to racism. At least it is without having gone through the whole series of causes and events, looking for discontinuities and seeing if anything else can explain the situation other than racism, which you just simply have not done. Sure, you can probably give me several studies that say this is due to racism or discrimination or something like that, but what you can't do is look back through their research and show me where they've gone through every other factor that plays into a situation to determine that this must be due to racism, because they haven't done it themselves. As things stand in today's society, things are 100% equal in terms of opportunity. There are no more barriers in place for a person of color in the same circumstances as a white person. And the key word there is in the same circumstances. If you were to look at a black family in the ghetto struggling to get out of it, there is an equivalent white family somewhere in some slum trying and failing to get out of it with all the same factors in place other than the color of their skin. Now, I don't think you can or even would try to deny that this is a factual statement. However, if this is something that you can accept as fact, doesn't that strongly suggest that the issue here has more to do with class than it does with race?
Do you understand basic English syntax? Like, you know, if I say this cat is pretty, I don't mean that all other cats aren't pretty. Like, do you really not get why saying all lives matter in response to Black Lives Matter is not only racially insensitive, but just patently ridiculous?
Do you understand basic English syntax? Like, you know, if I say all lives matter, that inherently includes black lives because black is a subset of all. Like, do you really not get why saying Black Lives Matter in response to police brutality, as though police brutality only matters when it happens to black people, is not only racially insensitive, but also patently ridiculous?
Isn't it offensive to men to assume that a man could only ever want equality for women, and therefore be comfortable with feminism as a whole in order to get laid, and that reduces us to beasts?
Tim, this isn't an idea that's directed towards men as a whole, it's directed towards specific men that call themselves feminists. Typically the kind of people who are accused of this most, especially on YouTube, are male feminists who very frequently parrot the ideas you hear other feminists say, but very rarely have anything to contribute of their own. Now there's a second reason this happens, and it's usually when men calling themselves feminists parrot ideas that are unfair and harmful to men as a gender.
If that was the case, wouldn't I attempt to get laid from my views instead of not ever trying that?
Not ever trying what? To get laid? Like in general? Tim, you are a sad, sad little man.
If you say you're an egalitarian, will you call out the man-hating slurs that you see coming from people within your community? People who use terms like cuck, beta male, faggot, or mangina? All of these things basically distill men down into thinking that the most important thing about them is to be having sex with a woman. That's rather offensive. So what are you doing to stop this kind of behavior in your community?
Christy, not a single phrase you referenced is a man-hating slur. Cucks exist. Like, if you look at Ian Danskin, there is no way of describing his situation where he is not a cuck. That's just a fact. And beta males exist. Beta females exist. Alpha males exist. Alpha females exist. The whole beta-alpha dynamics, that's a thing. That's not a slur. I guess you could kind of say that mangina is kind of hating a specific kind of male because it only describes a specific kind of male, but even then that's kind of reaching. And I'll have you know that not only is faggot a term of endearment, there is absolutely no interpretation of the word faggot that has anything to do with having sex with women.
What is the number of followers, the number of likes, the number of dislikes, the number of retweets, the number of subscribers, any of those numbers, any of those metrics, what have they got to do with the argument?
Okay, I'm gonna have to stop you here because the rest of what you're saying I have absolutely no frame of reference for. I don't even. But it's very interesting that you've asked us this particular question because this is what we typically find ourselves saying to feminists who complain about someone with a huge number of subscribers responding to a feminist who has only a few. I mean, if we agree on that, doesn't that mean that it's right for anyone of any number of subscribers to criticize any other person of any number of subscribers? Because I think that's the case. Do you think that's the case? Because you appear to.
Why is it that you go on and fucking on about safe spaces and trigger warnings and delicate little flowers, but continue to hide behind your cartoon avatars and your childish pseudonyms, and whenever anyone calls you out on your sexist, racist, homophobic, bigoted rhetoric, you become the argument of your own scorn and are hashtag triggered, as they say?
Well played, sir. Well played. Yes. The fact that I hide behind my avatar is in fact a form of a safe space. And because I hide behind my avatar, I am in fact a sexist, bigoted, misogynistic piece of shit. You got me.
Are you willing to publicly acknowledge and admonish the massive amount of hatred, bullying, harassment, and intimidation that a lot of your fans infringe upon people? And I don't mean these tiny disclaimers that you put under the description fold or flash for 2 seconds at the beginning of the video that you know nobody reads. I mean a public and ongoing anti-bullying stance. Or do you kind of like watching your fans go around harassing people and calling them slurs and telling them to kill themselves? You kind of like it, don't you? I mean, if that's your thing, I guess that's just what you're into. Just makes you a dick.
Unlike you, I'm not an authoritarian. I have absolutely no interest in telling the people who watch my videos what they can and can't do in their own free time. If my fans want to go shitpost on someone else's video or someone else's Twitter, I don't care. That's entirely up to them. It's not something you'll probably see me doing much of, but that's up to them. It's entirely their choice. And on top of that, the reason I don't care about it happening to other YouTubers based on what videos I make is because it's going to happen to them regardless. I mean, hell, I only have like 560 subscribers now, but I'm expecting in the future for people to come and say all kinds of nasty shit on my videos. I'm happy for it. I welcome that. I mean, if you're watching this video and you're someone who doesn't agree with me, post some nasty shit in my comment section. Call me out on some shit. Just say something. If you watch my videos and you agree with me, post some nasty shit in my comment section. Really call me out on something. Try to get your thumb in there. Like really hurt me. I want to see that. I would love to see that. Just go for it. Also, huge disclaimer. This only applies to me, my videos, and my comment section. I can't speak for other people's comment sections or videos. But just if you want to post some nasty shit on my videos, fucking do it.
Why do you find it so hard to believe that feminists are being harassed online?
I don't. Everyone gets harassed online. Suck it up. Get used to it. Embrace it. I would like to formally welcome you to the internet.
Do you understand the key importance of reproducibility and repeatability in scientific research? That's simply going to Google Scholar, doing a 30-second search for keywords and pulling out the first paper you find that backs up your stance is not a particularly credible way to do research. That you have to have a much broader overview, to read the material, to follow the citations through, to look at the broad brush approach to a particular problem.
Of course, Professor. I most certainly do understand that in order to actually critique some form of research, I do essentially need to deconstruct it down to its basic elements, and then go through it to see where any flaws were made, or whether there were flaws with the source materials that were used to construct the research in the first place.
You do realise that you're as much of a social justice warrior as those you critique. It's just that you espouse a different form of social justice, a rather less considerate, rather less forgiving, rather less kind form of social justice.
And here is where you're going to get a little bit of insight into how my mind works. Something about this entire clip of Professor Moriarty, really threw my brain for a loop. I couldn't quite get it. Initially when I tried to respond to this, I pretty much just dismissed it, but then I went ahead and tried to respond to the next few questions, and something occurred to me, and I came back to it after having done so, just to respond to this one. Now, I'm not going to answer his question here. I'm going to let the next clip from Christy Winters play out first, then I'm going to answer it, but I did want to take the chance to address this before showing this clip out of order.
If you identify as an egalitarian, then I'm interested in your take on the usefulness of the concept of the original position as laid out by John Rawls in his theory of justice.
From my perspective, the concept behind the original position should be critical in making decisions that relate to social and political justice. However, in the present day, I see a failure to do so on both ends. In the political landscape, I see a general failure to adhere to the second principle of the original position, in that I see the people who make up our political class acknowledge the inequalities in our education, political process, and especially income, but I see very little effort directed at balancing these things to make for a fair and just society, at least in practice. This, I suspect, has very much to do with the skewed interests of politicians who deliberate on the matter. On the other hand, I also see a general failure among the practitioners and academics of social justice to operate from behind the veil of ignorance, and also a willingness to violate the first principle of the original position in the process. Very much of social justice appears to work from within a highly subjective framework and apply pseudoscientific theories in coming to conclusions about how to achieve positive social change. At the end of the day, I'm not someone who will postulate that social justice in its current form is inherently malicious. However, I will strongly suggest that it intentionally ignores its responsibility to guarantee the equal basic rights and liberties needed to maintain the interest of a free and equal society in the pursuit of what it believes to be the greater good. Okay, so with that question out of the way, let's go back to Professor Moriarty's question.
You do realise that you're as much of a social justice warrior as those you critique. It's just that you espouse a different form of social justice, a rather less considerate, rather less forgiving, rather less kind form of social justice.
So after having answered Christie's question, this one makes a little bit more sense to me. Professor Moriarty is using the phrase social justice warrior unironically to refer to someone who specifically advocates for social justice. He's not using the phrase social justice to refer to what's taught in academia, but to refer to the concept of social justice in and of itself. You see, looking at it from his perspective, and this just is sort of an assumption based on his wording here, I think that Professor Moriarty sees us as people who are trying to do a positive effect for equality. However, given the current ideals and actions of both feminism and social social justice, we perceive them to have ideas that work against the concept of equality, which is a true enough statement. So in this respect, I feel that Professor Moriarty perceives us as being social justice warriors, however, our brand of social justice is completely in opposition to their own. And looking at it objectively, I have to agree that this is a true statement, so the answer to his question is yes, I guess you could say we are social justice warriors. In the strictest and most literal definition of the phrase, being someone who fights for social justice. Now the other piece of this, when he referred to it as being a less kind, less forgiving form of social justice, I think he's referring to the way in which we'll call out feminists and social justice warriors, specifically in how it's more hostile than what you would normally see in peer-to-peer discourse, and to that, whatever.
As a supporter, as a proponent of freedom of speech, why do you want to quash academic freedom? If you're not familiar with the concept of academic freedom, it's worth, in the UK at least, looking up the 1988 Education Reform Act and seeing what that says about the rights of academics to put across unpopular opinions.
Academic freedom must necessarily yield to academic integrity, because when it doesn't, we get things like gravity is a social construct. As a professor of physics, which was my former major, mind you, you should be fucking outraged.
Why are you so obsessed with Anita Sarkeesian?
Because Anita Sarkeesian is obsessed with trying to slander my favorite thing in life. Literally my favorite thing about life. Fucking video games higher than sex, okay?
Do you really think you can spend your entire life in a perpetual state of emotional immaturity? Do you actually imagine that you will be able to perpetuate your adolescence for your entire existence? Wait, didn't somebody else ask this one? Wait, I gotta... Ah, fuck.
What the